Welcome back to Do Some Ish with me. Today, I want to discuss my experiences with the Street Bob and the Street 500. I want to speak a little about their differences and things that they have each done for me in my riding experience so far. The reason I purchased the Street 500 as my first bike was because of the size. After doing some research, I quickly learned that as a beginner rider, you do not want to start with a motorcycle that is going to be overpowering and is pretty much going to scare you out of the joy of riding. So I knew for a fact that I wanted to go with Harley. I did research on what type of models are the best ones to start with. This is a discontinued model, but for the purpose that I needed the bike for, it served its purpose, being that it was a very small engine, meaning that it does not have a lot of power, and the bike itself does not weigh a ton. It weighs right around 500 pounds, and that allows me as a new rider to get used to the mechanics of riding and not being afraid of going out on the street and taking the bike for a ride. Another reason for why I chose the Street 500 was price point. At the time, my mentality was I want to keep it at a very budget-friendly cost because I was unsure if I was actually going to like the way riding made me feel, or if I was even going to get into riding for real. I purchased this bike for $3,000. I ended up purchasing the bike without even having a permit or anything at that point. And it kind of sat in my trailer for a few weeks until I actually took my MSF course and all of that stuff. Lastly, this bike allowed me to have the introduction to riding that I believe every rider or every new rider should experience, which is feeling comfortable going out there and having fun on the streets instead of worrying about, oh my God, am I gonna tip my bike over, or what, is this too much power, or am I gonna roll the throttle too hard and fall off the bike or something like that. So the bike itself is pretty smooth when it comes to the mechanics of it, but I'll touch on that in just a bit when I speak about the Street Bob. Next subject I want to touch on is what did this bike teach me and what it allowed me to learn. The first thing that I want to touch on is clutch control and friction zone. It's smooth in a way that it's kind of sluggish. All right, so getting used to the clutch on this motorcycle without meaning anything by it, it's so bad that when I got to a clutch on a different motorcycle, it made me learn it that easier on that newer motorcycle. If that makes any sense, it's kind of backwards, but the point is that this clutch is kind of sluggish, along with the brakes, the acceleration, and everything else on it, including the transmission. So by me learning on this bike that it's, I guess, maybe a lower tier bike or a more affordable basic bike, it allowed me to appreciate how crisp and tactile the controls are on different types of bikes. So that was a big learning point that I realized I learned after trying out different bikes. The second thing that I got out of this bike is the confidence. As I mentioned earlier, at first as a new rider, the first few times I went out on the road, it was all fear. But this bike allowed me to learn it fast, and not scare me to a point where I was trying to talk myself out of going and riding, which kind of ties into the last point that I want to make about this subject, and that is it actually removed the fear of riding for me. After spending some time behind the handlebars of this bike, I was leaning the bike way more comfortably, especially after I got put new wheels on it. The bike itself, it's not very aggressive. After putting a certain amount of miles and time behind the handlebars of the Street 500, there was no fear factor anymore. It came to the point where, I ended up getting my wife and my kids on the bike with me, and that kind of set a tipping point for me, which I'll discuss next. The reason why I upgraded from the Street 500 was not because I am masculine and want to ride a bigger bike, although size did have something to do with it at a certain point. But the main reason was, as I mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, I got to the point where I was comfortable enough with my riding and decided to have passengers on the bike. All right, now this varies all from my wife, who is an adult woman, all the way down to my youngest son, who is 12 years old. Obviously, there's weight differences there. The point that stood out to me was the fact that the bike just felt like it was overworking when I had passengers on it. All right, so that is understood, obviously, with a 500cc motor. And obviously, I still could have pushed through and kept riding with a passenger. At the same time, I wanted to embark on taking longer trips, right? So if I want to go away for a day trip with my wife on this bike, we probably would have looked a little ridiculous, right? Obviously, that's something that is more of a personal issue than anything else. But the point is that I didn't want to look a certain way or, end up somewhere on a road trip and encounter any type of issues because of the weight of the that's on the motorcycle. When it comes to longer trips, I could take solo long trips on this bike that would most likely entail riding at higher speeds and possibly some highways. And when I took this bike on the highway, it just felt like if it was not planted to the ground correctly to me. The handlebars felt just a little too wobbly for my liking. I've been on 3 different bikes after this Street 500 on the highway, and none of those bikes, including the Street Bob, felt like that, which kind of took away from the interest of taking longer trips or day trips on this motorcycle. I don't think it's a very comfortable bike to ride for long periods. Although I do like the riding position on this bike, it does feel, in a weird way, more natural than the Street Bob for the fact that the handlebars are lower. But the pedal positioning and all of the other ergonomics, it just doesn't feel very comfortable long term. Now, after seeing myself on this bike on pictures and videos, and also concluding that I actually do want to continue making this my hobby and develop my motorcycle riding skills. With that decision, I knew that I either had to put more money into it or purchase a different bike. Obviously, there could be stepping stones, and there probably will be stepping stones. The Street Bob may be a stepping stone itself. But the reality of it is, I made the conscious decision that I wanted a bagger look on the motorcycle that I decide to move forward with. And after feeling so comfortable and understanding the basics of riding a motorcycle, I decided that I did want to get a bigger bike for all of the reasons that I just mentioned, but also for looks. All right, now looks goes all the way from, me being, I'm not a tall person, but me being on this motorcycle, it does look like I'm sitting on a smaller platform. And I obviously do not feel like, or did not feel like I was ready for something like a Road Glide, which is way bigger. So I decided to do more research. I settled on a Lowrider ST looks wise, but I did not have Lowrider ST money, so I decided to continue doing research and figuring out what options there were, which led me on to looking into Street Bob models.
Making it bounce. Making it bounce, lead and drop, making it bounce. Making it bounce. Making it bounce, lead and drop, making it bounce. Making it bounce.
When it comes to handling, there's a huge difference between the Street 500 and Street Bob. The Street 500 and the Street Bob have about 100-pound plus weight difference among themselves. So obviously, that's a very large difference in weight. Not to mention that the Street 500's body is just a smaller frame body, so it's easier to move around and tilt and things like that. Where the Street Bob feels like a bigger machine, which it is, so it doesn't feel as easily to like throw around to the sides, but it does feel more grounded than the Street 500. So that's something to quickly note on there. When it comes to seat height on both bikes have saddleman seats. The handlebars on the Street Bob feel more like a sporty feel versus the Street Bob, which is more like a cruiser. Now, because of my height, there are big differences in between the bikes. I'm probably about 6'2", 5'8". Okay, I'm 5'8", and I can plant both of my feet on both bikes without a problem. Now, I do say that with the saddleman seat on the Street Bob, it does bring you up a little bit. So with the stock seat that it came with, I actually felt a little lower and was positioned a little lower. So that's just something to note. But even with the saddleman seat, I can still plant perfectly fine. One big item that I want to ask myself, or that I want to share, is which of these two bikes actually puts a smile on my face. It's very easy to tell. I wouldn't have spent money on this bike, changing it from the stock look, if I didn't enjoy the bike more. I think both bikes served their purpose and had their purpose for me. The Street 500 allowed me to get into biking, get the basics down, allow me to get the mental pressure out of the fact that I was worried about, if I drop my bike, am I gonna drop a bike that's thousands and thousands of dollars? Versus now that I feel more comfortable, I understand that I have crash bars if I do tip over at any point, but it did remove that fear, allowing me to learn the mechanics properly. Where the Street Bob, now that I've gotten to the point where I am and I feel comfortable where I am with riding, it now is serving the purpose of allowing me to enjoy the rides and have fun, which I think was my ultimate goal. It wasn't looks, it wasn't having a big ass engine. It was simply allowing me to learn this correctly and respectfully, and continuing to want to do it and improve my skills on it, and obviously improve the look of the bike itself. So overall, the Street 500 never let me down. It did everything that I expected to do and more. The only downside that I would mention about the Street 500 is, as I mentioned earlier, some of the controls are smushy. They don't feel crisp, specifically the transmission. I mean, with this motorcycle, I've clicked from first, thinking I'm going into second gear multiple times as I was riding on the streets. And instead I was going into neutral. All right, and that happened to me so many times, and it has yet to happen to me on the Street Bob. Now, the Street Bob, there are zero complaints. I mean, the braking is 1,000 times better. The transmission is tactile and audible. The motor is strong, but not to the point where you feel you're gonna fall off the bike. Now, coming from a smaller motor, there's definitely a difference, right? I definitely have to control my throttle and how it responds in comparison to the Street 500. But it doesn't mean that it's scary or that it's, deviating me from continuing to ride. So, would I buy the Street 500 again? If I'm a brand new rider, absolutely. It served its purpose. And as I mentioned earlier, with the mushiness from the controls and the tricky transmission, it made it feel that much better when I moved on to a better bike, or when I even just test drove different bikes. Learning on the Street 500 was not as scary as I thought it was. With it being my first bike, I kind of just went about it without even giving it too much thought, because it never made me question. So it did serve its purpose, and I would absolutely purchase it again. Now, the Street Bob, with it being a bigger machine, there was the initial intimidation factor with the weight at lower speeds. It does feel substantially heavier than the Street 500, and even taking low speed turns makes it feel more of a heavier machine. But with friction control and some rear braking control, that all kind of balances itself out. Now, my favorite part about it is the size. It makes you feel like you're actually riding a motorcycle versus you getting on a motorcycle that you're just literally clearly a learner every day. With this one, I feel like it's more of I'm a rider. The engine torque is definitely felt. And to be honest, I don't even think that I've given this thing half the throttle power that it has. I have gotten happy with the throttle at a couple moments. I have taken it on the highway and got up to speed fairly quickly, but I haven't even pushed it to the limits that I know it can go to. And as of right now, I have had no need to. I will mention something that's important to know. When it comes to insurance and budgeting, I feel like the Street 500 just takes that because it's just a smaller platform. It has less things that people may want to do to it since they're just learning on it. Not to mention insurance. The cost of insurance was, I want to say, about $250 cheaper per year than the Street Bob itself. And the Street Bob itself is a platform that you can customize so much that there are just so many aftermarket parts to it that just makes you spend the money. So that doesn't help your budget. Now, if you've never ridden before, I would absolutely steer you towards a smaller motorcycle such as the Street 500, just because it's going to help you learn the platform, it's going to help you feel comfortable when riding. But if you are a rider and you already have experience riding, then I wouldn't even question the decision of just going straight to a Street Bob. So, did I make a mistake buying a Street 500 as my first motorcycle? The answer is no. And I didn't expect to move from it so quickly. But I think that because it served its purpose so well and the commitment that I had to respectfully learning how to ride, I'm now in a position where I decided to get a bigger motorcycle and I feel extremely comfortable riding this bike because of this one. I hope this video was helpful in deciphering some of the thoughts, decisions, and options when it comes to these type of motorcycles. And if you stuck around for this long, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for future videos.